Hello and welcome to Entre Nous. Today we have a very, very special guest, Mark Parkinson. From childhood spent across different countries to becoming a pioneer leader in international education, Mark Parkinson has navigated life's challenge with resilience and purpose. A former private banking executive turned passionate educator. He has led top schools across India, Bangladesh, the UAE, Malaysia, and Cambodia, transforming institutions and shaping futures. But his most profound journey has been personal, marked by immense loss and the strength to keep moving forward. Today, he dedicates his time to meaningful projects, including his study and volunteer work with the Happiness Study Academy. His story is one of reinvention, leadership, and deep human connection. Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome to the Entre Nous.
Thank you, Laura. It's lovely to be here. It's a great honor, and especially having watched some of the earlier interviews, I'm looking forward to our discussion and very glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Let's see, Mark. You moved frequently as a child due to your father's military career and later attend boarding school on a scholarship. How did these early experiences shape your resilience and adaptability?
Um, I think to some degree, like any person, experiences of childhood are a mixture of both positive and negative influences that we carry through into our later life. Um, I think one of the initial things was that in going through that experience as a young child of frequently moving, I think I became unconsciously aware that becoming incredibly strongly attached to individual friends and that when those friendships were broken, it really hurt. And especially because in those days, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have I'm that old. And we didn't have the opportunities to keep in touch easily. To send an airmail letter took weeks and weeks to get there, and then time for the person to write a reply and send it back. So, even maintaining relationship and communication with family was difficult, let alone other people. Going to boarding school, I guess academically, it was the right thing if I could pass the exams, which I ultimately was able to with the help of a great teacher who gave me some extra support when I was living in Cyprus. So I was like 10 or 11 years old. It was right academically. I think I probably would have gone through 4 or 5 schools otherwise in the space of the time from age 11 to 16 or 17. But in hindsight, at a personal level, it was very tough and very challenging. At the time when I started, it was the war had just broken out in Cyprus between the Greeks and Turks who were fighting over ownership of Cyprus. And so one of the results was that after my first term at boarding school, the British government decided it was not safe for children to go back there. So when the Christmas holiday came up, I couldn't go and be with my family. And instead, I had to go and stay with grandparents in England. So I went at the age of 11 for nearly a year without seeing my parents, my sisters. And within all that time, of course, as well, there was a part of me that knew that I was supposed to be phenomenally grateful for the opportunity I was getting. But what I'd actually discovered was a massive culture shock. And this was an environment that was, the vast majority of the children were there because their families were wealthy.
Yeah.
They talked a different language to me, a language which initially as a kid, I was shocked. Involved so much swearing, for example.
Yeah.
I have a subsequent theory that the language gets worse the more you go to the top of the society and the bottom of the society, and the bit
Yes.
in the middle. And I guess that's where I was coming from. Tends to think that the language you use matters, but these people, just used this very strong language at will. But it was also it was a violent place, and if your face didn't fit, then you were in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, and in that environment, in a boarding school, nowhere to turn.
Of course, you're
And so the first 3 years were extremely tough, and very, very hard. And I, quite frankly, could not go to my family and say, "Look, I hate this. It's terrible," because I was meant to be grateful for the opportunity I was getting. So, in fact, at the time, the only person I ever used to talk about it with was my great grandfather, who at the time was about 90. He'd fought in wars in I think in the Boer War. He'd been in Afghanistan, in the Khyber Pass, had all this history. But he was the one person who I opened up to during holidays when I would see him. But the rest of the time, it was about survive and cope on my own. Now, in the end, as a boy of 13 or 14, the way I coped was I learned to suppress emotions, to stuff things down and bury them very deep. I learned to use humor as a weapon, and as a tool to make myself more acceptable to the in crowd or whatever. And I was able to also benefit from the fact that as I got older and a bit bigger and stronger, I was also able to do reasonably well in sport. And that also took some of the pressure off. And some of these guys would ease off because I started to be on sports teams and things like that.
Exactly.
So the first 3 years of boarding school were marked with being an underdog and a lot of bullying and very, very harsh treatment. The latter part with kind of maybe going off the rails somewhat, testing the boundaries, breaking a lot of rules, to the point where I think after the 5 years were up, I think the school were quite glad to see the back of me. I did okay academically, not brilliant, not terribly, but I did okay. But I had become somewhat wild, in terms of all that suppressed stuff, I guess, had to leak out somewhere. And so it
Somewhere.
did.
Of course, of course. At 18,
Yeah,
at 18, you had to support your mother and sisters, right?
at least partially, and that was the only way that it was practical for me to continue in education because my parents had split by then.
Yeah,
And
because you continue your education, right? And
yeah, so from 16 to 18, it was doing A levels in the UK, in a college. Um, but yes, practically the only way that I could do that without going in and getting a full-time job was to supplement the family's income. And so yeah, I took whatever work was going and just did it.
how did that experience influence your work ethic and sense of responsibility?
Oh, I think in so many ways. Even earlier before that, it was often my habit in those days to get summer jobs because the boarding school kids tend to get longer summer breaks.
Yeah.
So one summer I worked on a farm, and it was tough, hard work. I think I was probably 15 at the time. And one little story: the farmer, it had been wet, so we weren't able to get harvest in. In the morning, I used to do work cleaning out pigs and cows and bulls and all sorts of other animals. But in the afternoons, he had me out creosoting fences. This great big long fence that was about a mile long, and I'd go out
Exactly.
there every afternoon and stand there, sometimes in the sun, sometimes in the rain, creosoting this fence.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a watch, and my watch broke. So my watch wasn't working. So I was due to finish work, I think, at 5 o'clock. And I had to estimate when it got to 5 o'clock. So I thought it had reached 5 o'clock. I gathered up my pots of creosote and my brushes and things and headed back to the farm, which was about a mile and a half walk, but visible because I was up on a hill, so visible from the farmyard. So when I walk into the yard, there's the farmer standing there with his arms crossed, looking very stern, big guy. And he said, "What time do you call this?" I said, "Well, I
Okay.
think it's 5 o'clock." He said, "No, it's not 5 o'clock yet. Get back out there."
Oh, they send you back.
So he sent me all the way back out, and he stood in the farmyard and watched me go up the hill. So I get all the way back up the hill, mile and a half or whatever. I paint another section or two of the fence, and then I come back. Then when I get home, eventually, my mum goes, "Oh, you're late today." I said, "Don't ask. Don't ask."
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so I think in those days, and working as well a lot in things like, serving tables in restaurant and
Yeah.
in hotel kitchen, a bar kitchen and things, um, learning about customer service and customer service orientation and, aspects of professionalism. Waiting tables in UK at that time, back in all those years ago, we used to have a chain of restaurants that were particularly on major roads, motorways and highways and things, called Little Chef.
Okay.
They don't exist anymore. But especially when there were bank holidays and things, these places would be absolutely packed out. And you'd have people queuing into the car park waiting for tables. And so you would just be go, 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 go while you were working. And on one occasion, I'm clearing a load of plates and things from a table, and I go through a door and I push the door open with my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And some ketchup sachets had got trapped under the bottom of the door. So the door didn't swing open the way it was supposed to. And my shoulder went through a pane of glass. And my shoulder was cut and I'm bleeding. And so
Wow.
I'm getting patched up in the staff room. There's blood pouring down my arm. Manager S comes in and says, "Come on, quickly, we need you back." And literally within seconds, I'm back out working, serving tables until
Oh
a
my
customer
God.
said, is that blood running down your sleeve, running down your arm? And I realized I'm serving tables and there's actually blood dripping off my elbow.
Oh my God.
I said, "Oh, sorry about that. I'll go and clean up." So I just cleaned it up and carried on working. I should have had stitches, but it just didn't happen.
Oh, oh my gosh. Um, and also, you built a successful, career in private banking, becoming one of the youngest office manager in the UK. And what led you to leave finance and pursue it like teaching in India on a minimal salary?
Okay, I think you used the word successful there. And I think, here there's a very important set of thoughts that have that I've come to understand as I've got older about how we define what is success.
Yeah.
Because I look back on that time and I know, it's not even there's not even an ounce of doubt. I know I was a horrible, horrible boss to work for. Um, that was partly my own fault, I suppose, but also partly manipulated by the senior managers above me. And by way of example, so I'm 27 and I'm appointed to manage the office in Cambridge. And my regional manager, first of all, he sought to play up that it was him that had got me the job, whereas the chief executive seemed to be saying very clearly that he'd selected me. But the regional manager wanted my personal loyalty, so he dressed it up a bit. But he then said, "Mark, I need you to know this office you're taking over, the team's rubbish. They're awful. They're useless. And you're going to have to really push them into shape. And we're counting on you."
Mhm.
So I'm 27. I'm driven by nature, I think, because of some of those past life experiences I'd had before then.
I was going to
I
tell you
go in
that.
all guns blazing.
Yes, of course.
Well, end of my first year, we'd gone from about number 8 to number 1 in the country in terms of cost income ratio, staff cost income ratio, profit per head, etc., etc., etc. I think we'd risen from about number 6 to number 3 in terms of customer service. All the staff got maximum bonuses, and I thought, oh, they'll be delighted. No,
Of course. No.
no. We'd also lost a few colleagues, people who actually either showed the door or chose to walk out the door because they just didn't fit with the kind of way that I was running the place. And even because of the great achievement, I got the permission from the regional manager to allow spouses to come to the Christmas party. Normally, the Christmas party was just employees, and I said, "No, can I have extra money and spend some extra money and let the spouses come?" I thought I was doing a good thing, and in most circumstances, you'd say, "Yeah, that's good," because spouses play an important part in people's achievement, especially when they're working hard. But as I was greeting people, so my lead salesman walked in the door with his wife. I had never met her before. So I met him and he introduced his wife, and I put my hand out and she looked at my hand and she said, "I'm not shaking hands with you.
Oh, wow.
Before you came here, I had a husband."
Oh.
Now, the guy, he was mortified and the color went all out of his face.
Course.
And he turned to his wife. He said, I told you not to. And there was some certain irony. He actually was one of the people who'd flourished in the environment I was creating, and he was enjoying the work.
Yeah.
And more often than not, into the evenings, I'd still be there and he'd still be there and a couple of other people. And I'd be saying to him and the other married guys, "Come on, I think you should go home now." And I'd actually be trying to push them out the door.
Yeah.
That's not what their wives saw, because, of course, they get home and the wife says, "Oh, you're late again." Yeah, boss kept me.
Yeah, of course. He was there and I had to stay.
Yeah. And so, yes, I mean, so at the end of 2.5 years at that office, I mean, the office did phenomenally well, but it was no surprise that they replaced me with a new manager who was much more empathic, much more a people person, much
Yeah.
more people oriented. The next office, I had learned some lessons, and some of those things I think I got better, but it was still very much performance first.
Of course.
But it was also, I think, that then as the time went on, I became more and more, I think, at a deep level, feeling that making rich people richer wasn't necessarily going to fulfill me for my whole life. And also, the part of the work that I'd enjoyed most was the customer facing client, the client interface kind of work. And that was always an irony as well. I had great relationships with my clients. My relationship with my staff may have been frosty, but my relationship with clients was always superb. And as a result, set new records in the company for low turnover of clients. Not, I didn't lose clients and things. And one of the ways was that I remember one elderly lady saying to me one time, she said, my son keeps trying to persuade me to move all my finances to this other financial advisor who advises him. But I tell him, there's just no way, I'm not moving. She said, because for one, you don't treat me like a silly old lady.
Okay.
And you take the time to educate me, even though I understand nothing, enough so I can ask the questions and be sure that you're doing the right thing. And we might touch on that later. That's something I carried across into my work in education as well, and working with parents in schools. And it's a strong belief I have that you'll always, in the long term, do far better if you invest the time and the effort to help people to understand and to want what they need.
Yeah.
And I think I've heard doctors sometimes talk in this way, that need, and many doctors today, when they're so rushed for time and they get such little short
Mhm.
time with each patient, one of the things that they rue is that they don't have the time to help the patient to ask for what they need rather than what they thought they wanted.
Exactly.
But in so many fields, it's too simplistic to just say, what are they asking for? Give them that. Give them lots of that, and we'll be a successful business. Well,
Exactly.
successful in the short term, maybe. But if ultimately people come to realize or even sense unconsciously that there's a misalignment between what they got and what they should have got, and that it didn't serve them the best, they will not blame themselves for asking for the wrong thing in the first place. They'll blame you, and
Yeah.
quite rightly. So, as I say, I think that there is that important thing for organizations in all sorts of fields, but I think it happens to be really, really important around the most important things in life, which probably are our children and our money,
Yeah.
um, to take the time to make sure that people are asking for the right things.
You led schools across multiple countries and often in challenging political and organizational environments, right? What have been your key leadership principles in turning around struggling situations?
Uh, I guess the first and foremost, I mean, with everything I've already said about the kind of leader I was when I was in private banking, was what probably really amounted to a 180-degree turnaround in terms of how I led. And I think over the years that was helped with doing a lot of reading, reading and studying and taking some courses and things, but also looking at the whole issues and aspects of effective leadership,
Mhm.
really hard. And I was very inspired over the years by the work of people like Tom Peters and Peters and Waterman, who wrote the seminal work In Search of Excellence, um, and many others like them. International schools, in fact, K to 12 schools, pretty
Mhm.
much throughout the world, are very heavily skewed to being female environments.
Mhm.
Now, when it comes to raising boys, there are those who say that that's to the detriment in the world, and that it contributes to some problems and challenges that we have. Um, but that's maybe for another day. But the reality is that the vast majority of people working in education are women.
Yeah.
The vast majority of members of leadership are women, and some of my time within education has been leading teams or being a member of teams where I might be the only male on the team,
Mhm.
and to have been the kind of leader I was back in those banking days.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the women I worked with would not have tolerated for 5 minutes, um, and quite rightly. And so, yeah, I had to do the work, and I still consider that there is a degree to which I'm still doing the work, in terms of myself as a leader, and I think becoming a lot more reflective, um, being willing to sometimes ask for the feedback from people, even when there might be a sense that I'm not going to like all the feedback I get.
Yes.
Um, I think those things have played an important part. But the other aspects, I think, in terms of whether it was turning schools around or taking good schools and making them better, whatever it was really, I think, a few things. That one of the first, I think, is getting to clarity and having a period of time where all voices are important in terms of getting to the meaningful vision about where we're going and why we're going there. Um, then engaging people in the debates and the discussions about the routes to and towards such a vision. and what that entails from people. And then that is really about making sure that all voices are heard in terms of, and that includes the students themselves. It particularly includes parents, but also time with parents, um, to put in their language and their terms,
Exactly.
and with an understanding about the benefits to them and their children of why that vision and why are we going in that particular way. And I think then within the schools and within education teams, often it's involved a lot of work which was around helping people to see possibility. Too often I found that within education environments, people are operating within very narrow confines about what they think is possible. Um, and kind of getting people to open up on that. And I think in some ways, having come to education from outside, that was a benefit and a big plus for me, because I could ask naive questions sometimes, and I could say, well, why do we do this way? Why do we not do it that way? And not settle for the, well, we've always done it that way, as an answer,
Mm-hmm.
but to do some things that freed other people up as well to start thinking from possibilities. I can remember when we were setting up a new school in Sharjah in UAE.
Yeah.
And just one little example. Before we were opening the school, there were a lot of challenges. We were opening at the wrong time of the academic year, so it was a kind of a soft opening.
Okay.
The owners had some big ambitious numbers though about how many students they wanted us to get. So the marketing had to be uh, on point and quite assertive to get into people's minds. It meant that many of those children who were going to come in needed to be changing schools from other schools, and people need a good reason to change their child's school in mid-academic year, all those
Mm-hmm.
sorts of things. But one of the things that we did, and this was some work that came out of a brainstorming session with some of my leadership team. School uniform finished up. Most of the schools in the area had quite traditional uniforms. We finished
Yes.
up with shorts or a skirt with a like polo t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
The polo t-shirt on the front looked fairly standard. It had the school logo on the front, but on the back, in a curve across the back, every child walked around with the phrase, uh, "I am." Right. But basically, the theme of it was, "I am unique.
Okay.
I am special. I'm unique." And it tied to one of the core values that we were espousing, which was about individualization of the learning experience, um, and personalized learning, personalized development, the focus on the individual child. And so, this use of the word unique and the fact that these kids were walking around with this word on their backs, um, the kids loved it, especially because teachers took time for them to understand, what does it mean? What does it mean to be unique?
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, Parents also liked and started to get a reaction. People would say, "Oh, I saw this kid walking around in the mall,
Yeah, of course.
late
What is all
afternoon, and
this
they're wearing
about?
this
Yeah.
t-shirt." And it's, "Oh,
Yeah.
where's this kid come from? What school is this?" So this is one little example of, and yet I've not seen too many schools either then or now that put a phrase like that onto the uniform that actually takes one of the core values of the school and just puts it right out there in people's faces and says, "We're serious about this. We're not messing around, and it's not just nice words."
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, because it will be a very special school if you see that that they are paying attention to your child and teaching that he is unique and he has his own everything, and
I
he's
remember now, it was "I am me, I am unique." It was "I
yeah,
am me,
that,
comma, I am unique."
that's perfect.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're going to touch a very um I'm going to ask you, about your son
Yeah,
and loss of your son, Thomas.
yeah,
In 2018, it's an altering moment,
yeah,
How
massively.
has this shaped your perspective of mental health, education, and personal purpose?
Um, yes, it was February 2018, and you know, I don't ever think that there's any need to beat around, to be vague about, the fact that it wasn't that he was, hit by some illness or something. He took his own life, and he did
Yeah,
commit suicide. Um, in subsequent days and weeks, there were little clues came to light,
yeah,
sometimes from, apparently seemingly innocuous little comments made in jest with a friend here or somebody there or whatever, but that he had been battling with depression. And I think, one of the things it highlighted, and my own subsequent experiences over the following weeks and months also highlighted for me, was that for those of us who choose to live a long way away from our home and base environments, um, availability of support networks can be near impossible. In Thomas's case, the school he was in was one of the schools that was part of the group that I was leading. Um, had a counselor. The school had the campus had a very good counselor. He had conversations with the counselor. Um, and there was there was this very unusual experience for me. I think, and unique perhaps compared to other people, in that after he'd gone, I mean, the first 2 or 3 weeks, obviously, people flew in. My sisters flew over from UK. Uh, a wonderful friend who I love like a brother flew in from India and was close for some days. He just dropped all his schedule of work and everything and just came straight over. But then things, people had to get back to their lives, and I
yes,
left, and there's me, and I'm there, and I had to go to work every day and, for example, sit with the principal of that particular school or the counselor and talk about how we were making sure that all the other children were safe, that this was not having a knock-on effect. Thomas was a popular kid. He'd become a member of the student council just a few months before. So a lot of kids even thought they knew him a bit in the school because of the fact that he was on the student council. Even, some may have known him, some knew him a lot, some knew him a little, but they all felt like they knew him somewhat. And so, yes, my professional role was about the good of the school and the rest of the school community. And also, when you've gone to live in a place like that, most of the people are from your work environment, the parents, the staff, the leadership team. And so, how much you can be opening up or talking to them about whatever personal issues and turmoil you're dealing with is really, really small. And then, as I've got older, I guess I've reflected also that there's a gender factor as well, and there are different expectations, and it goes wherever you are in the world about how men and women deal with um, calamities in their lives, with trauma, and it's much harder for men to open up and talk,
yes, of course.
especially if you're the boss. You can't start sort of sitting down and burdening your own staff, your own team members by opening up and talking. And so a lot of the time, and as I said, professional help was not really on the cards when I was there in Malaysia. And so I guess going back to very similar situations to those days when I was in school and getting bullied, it was just a case of going inside and burying myself sort of deep inside introspectively and just having to do the work on myself bit by bit and making a lot of mistakes along the way. And a lot of cliche things, go to work during the day,
Yeah.
put a professional face on, do the best I can, do what I've got to do, go home, close the door, sit with my cat and with the urn with Thomas's ashes and yeah, just fall apart and be in pieces all over the floor, and then know that by the next morning I've got to put myself back together and go do it all again.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me, I suppose, that thinks I'm still here and therefore I was able to do all of that, but it's a far from perfect method. It's like probably the most painful way that anybody can deal with such things.
Yeah.
But also in terms of looking at Thomas himself and so many other children of his generation, for whatever reasons, as a society, we've created a situation where they are a generation that don't have, or too often don't have the ability or the wherewithal to find those resources in themselves to draw on, that resilience, that strength to just gut it out when it's horrible, to ride through the trough and probably as well to know that however deep the trough is, it's a bit like, as a youngster, I used to sail quite a lot, and occasionally would be out and perhaps a storm would come up, and it would get a bit scary, and you're there, and when you go down into the trough between two waves, and you look up and you see there's a wave towering in front of you and a wave towering behind. That can be scary because you believe that something extreme is going to happen. But the reality is that it lasts for some moments. And then you rise up on the side of the next wave. And then you go through it all again. And then you go again. And then you go again. And then you go again. And yes, in terms of the cliches, as I said, when you're doing these things on your own, the solutions that you look for, that you draw on, are not necessarily all the good ones, and they're not always healthy. I don't think anyone in the positive psychology field or Tal Ben-Shahar or anyone else is ever going to suggest that your solutions lie in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. But as a man in those kind of situations, I forgive myself for the fact that maybe that was where I looked sometimes.
Yeah. Understandable. And Mark, given your personal and professional experience, what do you think school and parents need to do to better identify or supporting students struggling with mental health?
Oh wow, that could be a totally separate, 3-4 hour, 5 hour discussion. I think there's so much. We are in a fundamentally different world, and I think I am maybe even more aware of it and acutely aware of it being here in somewhere like Southeast Asia, where the nuclear family is still something of a novelty.
Yeah.
More and more people in the city are living as nuclear families, but here the holidays are still massively important. And for example, in early April or middle of April, it will be Khmer New Year, and the city will be like a ghost town. It will be gutted. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people will head to their provinces and be with their families. they don't do much when they're with the family. They'll sit around. Sometimes they bicker a little bit, and they'll drink some beer, play some cards, do some karaoke together. But it's just that being together, and there is a collectivist approach towards the children. Each one of those children knows that they're part of something much bigger.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't yet learned all the ways to make the nuclear family really effective as a place for young people to develop, especially when so many of them, I mean, as was the case in mine, where it even becomes just a single parent. So you have a single parent who's working, maybe even as the kid's getting older, working long hours, and I think I believed in that situation. What we see in a lot of the literature around children, that once they get into the teen years, their relationships with their peers are way more important to them than the relationships with family. So I would think, okay, it doesn't matter that he's not seeing me for hours every day, or that we're not around each other masses, or even that when we are home, maybe I'm in the kitchen doing something, or I'm sitting at the dining table doing some work on a laptop and he's in his room. It doesn't matter. And then you throw into the mix everything that's happened to young people in terms of the developments of social media. Incidentally, that's one of the reasons why I chose to be part of the group within the HSA club that's been looking at this whole issue and ways to propose solutions and find ways forward about the impacts that social media is having on young people. Because we come up against massive walls of misinformation as well, often created by the social media companies themselves, to try to refute the growing body of evidence that's being pulled together by people like Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, but many other researchers as well, about the impacts that social media is having, because it undermines and changes the nature of that relationship with the family, even if the family is very limited in terms of who's present, even if there are some siblings and there are maybe two parents there rather than one. Still, the nature of that relationship is different. Then you change the nature of their relationships with their peers, because somehow often a peer who's halfway around the world, dropping cool memes on TikTok is more interesting than the peer who sits next to you in chemistry class.
Yeah.
We're still learning, I think, and we're still having to work on these things about how we support effective development and mental health development for young people in those circumstances. And we know as well that it's affecting boys and girls in different ways, but I think there's no question and no doubt it is affecting both. Some of the data suggests that it affects girls more, but in the case of boys, I just think the effects are different. They're no less.
In recent years, you've focused on projects that align with your personal values, right? Including your involvement with HSA. What drew you to HSA, and how does it fit into your broader vision? I think you answered a little bit before about this, but if you can just...
I think finding my way to HSA, I mean, partly, I think, like a lot of us, it was something I came across. My first experiences with Tal were reading one of his books. And then subsequently, the YouTube videos that were posted from his course at Harvard when he was teaching at Harvard. And then later, knowing that the Happiness Studies Academy existed and that he was teaching the certificate course, I just felt naturally drawn to it and felt that here was something that, firstly, at a simple level, would be good for me personally, and would be an important step in me continuing to evolve and make progress myself. But secondly, also in terms of the changes that we need to be making within education, and finding clues and more answers as to how to approach those things. Within education, I mean, now HSA and TAL's company, TAL's organization has a program for schools. They have a schools program,
Yeah.
which they market, and I believe the majority of the schools that are part of it are based in the US.
Mhm.
I personally have some reservations about how far a program like that can go, and that's because it is essentially a curricular-based intervention
Mhm.
that has to be sort of bolted into whatever's already going on within a school. Now, my belief is that if we're really to make a difference, we need to be taking the SPIRE principles that we learn within HSA
Yeah.
and applying those at the very root of what goes on in schools, and questioning and challenging everything, right down to even the architecture and how we construct and build schools. Some years ago, when it first came out, I was really wowed. I mean, as somebody who uh, tends to live and act and behave in ways that are quite extrovert, I think actually deep down, some of that was the result of those changes that happened to me in boarding school. But I think that somewhere there was something of an introvert in me as well. Maybe I fall somewhere in the middle as an ambivert, perhaps. But reading the work of Susan Cain and her book
Mhm.
Quiet, and I was blown away by it. And I read the whole book from a perspective of what was going on in school. And when I put the book down, I said, our schools are horrible places for introvert children. They are designed and built so much in the image of the extrovert child.
Mhm.
And worse, some of what we've done in recent years has actually made those challenges even greater. Once upon a time, children in school were expected to work alone or to be quite passive in the class while the teacher talks and the teacher writes on the board and they make notes. But it's a fairly insular, alone kind of set of tasks. Now we sit them in groups and tell them to do group work all the time. Now we tell them that you've got to do everything as part of a team. And,
Mhm.
and for the introvert child, we've just made the situation worse.
Exactly.
Where do they go to get away from the noise? Where do they go to get away from the hustle and the bustle? Where does the timetable give them space to stop and breathe? Short answer, it doesn't. It doesn't. So whether it's the architecture of the school, the way we design a school day, lunch breaks that are so short, being mindful about what you eat, being, the P of SPIRE, the physical
The
and our
physical.
diet. What are they eating? How quickly are they eating it?
Yeah.
Do they sometimes go without? I know in plenty of schools, teachers, students who go without because there's a meeting.
Mhm.
Student council has a meeting. The student council members, maybe they have a working lunch and they meet over food, but sometimes school heads don't like that because it leaves the conference room all messy afterwards. So they skip lunch. And they won't necessarily turn around to the principal and say, oh, we're not getting lunch because we don't have time, because between the end of one class period and the start of another, we're not going to have time to be in the meeting and go for lunch. So lunch goes by the board. How could that make sense if we want them to be in their best state to be learning? And it's almost like everywhere you look within a school and the way things go on. Communication with parents is another interesting one, in the sense that um, a lot of schools these days dread communication with parents.
Mhm.
sometimes it's made to feel that way because of a small handful of parents who perhaps will seek forcibly to push their own agenda about what they believe is right, what they believe should be happening, etc., etc. In these days of online communication, parents school leaders will often dread what's going on in parent WhatsApp groups and things, because invariably there will be people whose natural inclination is to think the worst of the school automatically and fast. And then so they get to broadcast that message now to all the other parents through these groups and to influence them. And so you have that desire to manage a positive, healthy relationship with your parent community, and yet you can be battling uphill sometimes against the fact that a small minority are pushing their own agendas. We're seeing right now in the US, even within the state system, a government which is saying give the power back to the states, which is going to mean that the nature of the education a child gets will be enormously different depending upon which state they happen to live in. And the opportunities that it gives them in life are therefore going to be very different according to the state that they were living in and brought up in. I'm a great believer in the views of the poet Khalil Gibran, that we don't own our children, and that our rights to shape and influence the way they think it should be very, very limited. We are not their controllers to force an agenda on them as to how they're going to think and feel and all sorts of other things. But we do need to go a lot further in terms of making information available to them in age-appropriate ways. Even around the process of learning itself. I've long believed, and I've done a lot of work with educators in the schools that I was leading over the years, to ensure that we were helping students to approach their learning effectively because they understood something of, so that we were teaching some basic fundamentals of neurology, for example, and what's understood about neurology and the working of the mind, and some of the stuff that, for example, Jim Quick has been making very popular in recent months and years. And quite a lot of that has been around for a long time in various forms. And what he's done, and I think he's done it very well, is pulled that material together from those various sources. But there was material around going right back to the 1980s and 90s by people like Colin Rose, who wrote a book called Accelerated Learning, and some of these things around understanding how the learning process works. And I've looked at a lot of this and thought, that I question, are there really bad learners, or are there learners with good and bad learning strategies?
Yeah.
And too much, we leave the strategy to chance as to how that kid learns. And so they pick it up from their siblings, they pick it up from a cousin, from classmates, and they perpetuate methods which really are not effective.
Of course.
And often very stressful, very time-consuming. They could be learning so much more effectively if we spent more time talking about and working around the how of learning.
Yeah. Now you remind me, when I was young, right? I hated math.
Yeah.
But it was because I didn't have the right method to learn. Because now I really don't have any problem with math, and I love math, and I can, do everything that I thought I couldn't. But because I didn't have a good method, and also the teacher was not, patient enough, or she didn't have the, I don't know, the way
I'm glad you've mentioned maths. Maths is a fascinating subject. There is probably no other subject in schools that creates for some children more of a phobia and a fear there are children on a spectrum. There are those who just find their way into maths very easily.
Yeah.
There are those for whom they'll battle at it and they'll stubbornly kind of plod their way through, but it's
Yeah.
not much fun. And then, as I say, there's a proportion for whom it's genuinely a source of fear and phobia. And
Yeah.
I've even had situations. I mean, as a school director or CEO, you'd think that my direct involvement with students would be relatively limited, but sometimes I can remember a couple of occasions where one particular comes to mind from when I was in Bangladesh with a young guy who had this genuine fear around maths, and I was the right guy in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Met him in a corridor and took him outside, and we sat down on some steps and we just talked. And he couldn't even bring himself to go in the exam room.
Mm-hmm.
And he and they're saying if he's not in the exam room in a certain amount of time, then he won't be allowed to sit the exam and it'll be
Yeah.
cancelled. And, in the end, he went in and we had a promise and a commitment as well that he would not step out until the exam finished. How
Okay.
much he did in there was up to him, and that I would be outside the door when he came out. And he came out the door and he's shaking. And I just said, "Do you want a hug?" And I just gave the guy, he's a nice young guy, and I just gave him a big hug. And I said, "You did it. I'm so proud. You conquered your fear. You went in there and you did it." But yeah, those issues around maths. One of the things I've often said to teachers, one of the reasons you're a maths teacher is because maths came easy to you.
Yes.
Can you get inside the head? Can you imagine your way across to being one of those kids? When I was in India, we had schools that often would, even the school owners would say, "Oh, recruit teachers who were gold medalists in their college and university in the sciences and maths, because it would look good to the parents. The parents will be impressed. Our chemistry teacher is a gold medalist." And I said, "No,
Curriculum.
those are the worst people to teach most of the children. They're great at teaching other potential gold medalists.
Yeah.
For the average child, they can't understand the fears and the difficulties that kid's having. But worse, they make the kid feel worse because their whole attitude will come across as, 'Hey, look, this stuff's not hard. Why are you making it so difficult?'"
Exactly.
Because they're talking from a position of what it is for them.
Mm-hmm.
But that touches upon another area that we have so much work to do in education, and that is around the focus for teachers and their development, their professional development, their training. I don't mean to demean teachers who say, "I love my subject," but I get scared when a teacher talks about loving his or her subject too much. I want them to love the children first and the
Yeah,
subject
exactly.
second,
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
because only in that way will they meet the children where they are.
Exactly. Yes.
At the
Mark,
at the at the big picture level as well. Sorry, just quickly at the big
no,
picture
no,
level
no.
within education, we've got another big issue, I think, right now. Post-COVID, people like any profession, people look at educators and they judge them by their actions rather than their words.
Mm-hmm.
For years and years, we go right back to people like Sir Ken Robinson and his phenomenal TED Talk. I think
Mm-hmm.
still the second most watched TED Talk ever. And we see educators talking about the need for reform, the need for change, the need to put
Yeah.
the child first, and the need to, in the words of Aristotle, be lighting a flame, not filling a pail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, what do our actions say? Post-COVID, if you pick up any education publication today, half the articles will be about special tutoring programs to help children catch up after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Catch up. What does catch up mean? It means fill the bucket faster because we weren't filling the bucket during COVID properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're espousing the lighting of flames, but all our actions say filling buckets. filling pails. And we shouldn't be surprised when then people question and doubt the profession if
Yeah,
the words and the actions don't match.
exactly, exactly. And what other key innovations or principles you would like to implement, like in education sector? Because I think you mentioned a planning of a potential new school project.
Like I say, I think it's bringing all those Spire elements
Mm-hmm.
right from the root, right from the core of the school, as
Yeah.
opposed to, so them being at the core of the school's values, but also the school's practices and strategy and tactics and techniques and everything. Just to take another quick example, I mean, if we're looking at Spire and the physical,
Yeah.
um, I talked just now about the problems of schools and introverts.
Mm-hmm.
If we talk about school and boys, the whole and whether this happened because of the fact that these were female dominated spaces,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, but the sitting and being quiet and waiting to speak until you're spoken to and uh, not fidgeting around and all those sorts of things are incompatible for so many boys in terms of how their brains and their bodies work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not getting nearly enough physical movement.
Yeah.
Another very quick story. When I was in Delhi in India, the winter there can be pretty harsh. I mean, this is a place that has 45-degree temperatures in the summer,
Yeah.
but the winter can get quite nasty. And also it gets foggy. So you have the fog
Exactly.
and the cold. And because of the nature of the fact that most of the year it's so hot, there's no heating in buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And ventilation's also limited because most of the time you want to get air moving, not stop air moving.
Exactly.
And so government schools were closed, private schools were given the option to close. Many parents were coming and saying, Mark, you've got to close the school. It's too cold for the children. I said, what? So they're better off being cold at home or cold in school? I
Yeah.
said, let them come to school. I'll promise you they won't be cold. Then what I did was I went to my teachers, and particularly I pulled all my PE teachers, and also any of the teachers who were quite physically minded themselves. I said, right, here's what we're going to do, and I'll even join in with you. We will have a system that makes sure that there's a whole team of us. When the bell goes for the end of a class period, one of us will dive into that classroom and be there for no more than 5 minutes. And within the confines of the space of the classroom, have some children doing running on the spot, jumping jacks,
Mm-hmm.
a few other simple exercises and things to warm up and just give their bodies some physical movement. Well, we did it. Children didn't complain they were cold. They were having fun. They
Of
went home,
course.
told their parents, no, I don't want to stay home. I want to go to school. But what's more, teachers, the subject teachers started saying, I had a really good lesson. The kids
Yeah,
were
because
really well behaved. The classroom management was easy. It was great. So these
yeah,
kids, because they got some of that physical, and especially the boys, they got that
energy.
physical
Yeah.
stuff out of their bodies for that
Yeah.
5 minutes. They concentrated and focused better.
Mm-hmm.
We also, in one of the schools, after having a visit from monks of Thich Nhat Hanh's
Mm-hmm.
monastery, we'd actually been hoping that he was coming, but he was unwell, so he couldn't come. That was really sad. I would have loved to have met him. But some of his senior monks came. And afterwards, one of our schools actually experimented with, well, I say experimented, it carried on for quite a long time because it was really effective. Twice a day over the tannoy system, a singing bowl would be sounded, not at a set time, but at random times. And the understanding through the whole school was that child or adult, whoever you were, when you heard that, you stopped. Even mid sentence, you stopped if you were speaking. You paused, you focused on your breath,
Yeah.
you focused also maybe in your mind on, am I doing what I should be doing the way I should be doing it right now?
Mm-hmm.
And then when it was over, you went back to doing whatever you were doing. But again, teachers and parents were reporting their kids were calmer, their kids were more on task, more focused, finding flow more in terms of their
Mhm.
classes. Parents saying the kids were coming home and they just didn't seem to be bouncing off the walls quite as much as before. And so some lovely effects out of things like that. And these are just some small examples, but there's just so much that can be done that collectively would amount to making the Spire elements and aspects a fundamental part of what it is to be in a school.
Yeah, you remind me. When I was living in Italy, I started to go to schools teaching them how to recycle and why to recycle and everything, right? And it was so much fun to work with them. And you know what I noticed also? That they teach the grown-ups.
Oh, oh
Like
yes,
you say, with the, stop and breathe and think and pause, pause for a little bit.
yeah.
They start teaching that to their parents, to everybody, because it's what I saw when I was teaching them how to recycle, why to recycle, and explaining them things to them. The parents will come and say, well, now I cannot throw anything, because he will say, no, mom, because this is here, this is there, and I was so happy.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, an interesting example of that in Malaysia, they had a very successful road safety campaign called, if I remember rightly, I think it was First Steps or something. Michelle Yeoh was the ambassador for the program, the actress.
Yeah.
But largely what made it effective was that it worked through the schools and through the children to influence the
Mhm.
parents. So everything from talking on the mobile phones while driving,
Exactly.
sort of
Seatbelt.
distracted driving, speeding, seat belts, a whole bunch of those sorts of things. Putting children in safety seats, wearing helmets when riding motorbikes and scooters, all of these things. And yes, the program wasn't directly targeted at the adults; it was targeted at the kids and teaching the adults through the kids, and it had an impact.
Yes.
There was no question. And that impact actually even showed through in the national statistics for deaths and injuries on the roads and things. So that's great. Yeah, it works.
Great. Mark, we are almost at the end of the interview, and I have to ask you, you have considering to write a book, right? But themes or messages would you like to explore, and what impact do you hope it will have?
Part of my problem here is that I have two conflicting desires. One is to actually write fiction, and the other is to write nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure which one is going to win over first. Right now, they kind of figure equally, so they're battling it out. When it comes to nonfiction writing, I mean, I used to write very actively with a blog, and the blog is still online. The link is still there on my LinkedIn profile. Has about 1,100 or 1,200 articles, of varying lengths. Still gets about 100 visitors a month, even
Oh,
though I've not written anything or marketed it for probably well over 2 years, maybe 2.5, 3 years. Um, so it may be that's step one: get the blog going again, uh, and possibly, without wanting to, of course, compete with Entre Nous, maybe some podcasting as well.
oh, that would be wonderful.
Uh, but and then let that naturally lead me as to which of the others is going to happen. So perhaps I allow both to start, and,
Yeah,
and then see which one naturally rises to the top.
that's
Because
important.
trying to battle on an either or right now, I'm just not finding the answer.
Exactly. Well, um, our we are at the end of our interview, and perhaps as a final thought, true impact isn't measured by titles or achievements, but by the lives we touch and the legacy we leave behind. I would love to hear your perspective. Does this resonate with you?
Very, very much, very, very much. And I say that even as someone who's been fortunate or honored or whatever over time to have been given titles to work under, whether it's CEO or whatever, manager. But yes, at the same time, I would say whether it was in companies, organizations, schools, or even an organization like the HSA Alumni Club, you see that some of the greatest influence comes from those who don't really have a title or you know, I would say even, for me as a volunteer, I've enjoyed, and I still enjoy very much the fact that I have a little role carved out within the community team.
Yeah.
Michelle and Leanne lead the team. Pretty much everyone, again, like in the school situation, everyone else on the team is female. But that doesn't matter; it's irrelevant. And I love the way they lead it. I get tasks and I don't have a title, and I say, yep, okay. When do you want that done? And I do it. There is space and scope for me to make suggestions, and we share ideas and things. But ultimately, it's that awareness that by doing my small bit, I'm playing a part in something bigger and more meaningful. I think the club fulfills a very, very important role in terms of that community and shared experience for people doing the HSA courses. I think it adds so much to the experience of doing the courses themselves. And so, but yeah, for that to happen, it needs volunteers. And they're not all going to have a title. They're not all going to be a leader in terms of with an official title. But we all get to lead in our own small way within those teams. And it makes a difference. We see that difference in so many ways.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, and I hope this is the first of many that we continue talking. And, I was so happy to have you in the Entre Nous.
Well, thank you, Laura. I loved your questions. They were really thoughtful questions, and it's been a real pleasure to have this conversation. I just apologize that my sinuses.
Don't worry.
You now and others later will have to listen to my voice being rather bunged up at the moment. So I apologize for that.
It's been a wonderful to have you in the Entre Nos. Thank you very much, Mark, and I hope to go and visit you in Cambodia.
Thank you, and you'd be very, very welcome. You and family come.
Thank you very much.
It's a fascinating place. Thank you.
Thank you.